The story begins with Little Red Riding Hood walking alone through the forest. Out of nowhere, a witch named Barbara appears and offers to help her, supposedly to fix her shoes. But Little Red Riding Hood doesn't want to waste time. She still has a long way to go before reaching a nearby country. Even so, Barbara insists that the shoes she's wearing are ugly and that in that country, beauty is everything. So much so that ugly people are often mistreated. Little Red Riding Hood finally allows Barbara to use her magic, but the help goes wrong. Instead of improving the shoes, Barbara leaves them even dirtier. The girl is understandably annoyed and goes to a nearby river to clean them. While she complains, Barbara admits she hasn't mastered that kind of spell yet. But as Little Red Riding Hood tries to wash them, the shoes slip away and get carried off by the current. She tries to follow them, but the water moves too fast. Fed up with everything, she walks away from the river, leaves Barbara behind, and continues on barefoot. Before long, she spots a young woman in the forest. It's Cinderella, and she's wearing Little Red Riding Hood's shoes. Without thinking twice, Little Red Riding Hood approaches just as Cinderella is burying something in the ground. She asks for her shoes, and Cinderella returns them without hesitation. That's when they start talking. Cinderella explains that she was burying her pet dove. Little Red Riding Hood feels sorry for her, and in that moment, she has a vision telling her that Cinderella is being mistreated. She asks her directly, and Cinderella eventually admits that her stepmother and stepsisters, Anna and Margot, have always been cruel to her. Cinderella asks how she knew, and Little Red Riding Hood simply replies that she could tell from the style of dress Cinderella is wearing. Cinderella says her stepmother forces her to dress like that because in that country, ugly people aren't taken seriously. She also explains that they basically treat her like a servant, and that Margot was the one who got rid of her dove. As they continue talking, Cinderella tells her that there will soon be a ball at the king's palace, where the prince will choose his future wife. She would have loved to go not to marry a stranger. She doesn't care about that, but because the prince is one of the few who doesn't discriminate against ugly people. The problem is that she has no pretty clothes, and Margot also threw away her only pair of slippers. Little Red Riding Hood notices that Cinderella has several cuts on her feet. When she asks about them, Cinderella says she hurt herself on thorns while picking raspberries for Margot. Both girls think about what they could do so Cinderella can go to the ball. And right then Barbara reappears. Barbara offers to help by fixing Cinderella's clothes. And it works. She also improves Little Red Riding Hood's dress. But when it comes to the shoes, Barbara admits she's not good with that kind of magic. At that moment, her niece, Tekla, shows up and decides to step in. She can help. She uses her magic to create glass slippers for both girls, but warns them about two important things. The magic will only last 24 hours, and each slipper will fit perfectly only on the first person who wears it. After that, Barbara transforms a rat into a human named Paul and turns a pumpkin into a carriage ready to take them to the ball. On their way to the palace, Cinderella thanks Little Red Riding Hood for everything. She never thought she'd be able to attend a ball like this, much less with company. They also mention that they only have 6 hours left before the magic disappears. But suddenly, Paul stops the carriage abruptly. He says they've run someone over. The girls get out to check, and Cinderella recognizes the man. It's Mr. Hans, the royal hairdresser. Little Red Riding Hood checks him, but he's already dead. Cinderella collapses, thinking everything is her fault. She says none of this would have happened if she hadn't insisted on going to the ball. Little Red Riding Hood comforts her, and Paul takes responsibility since he was the one driving. Right at that moment, Little Red Riding Hood has another vision. Looking more closely, she notices that Hans' boots are covered in mud. And not just a little. The boots were covered in mud in a way that only made sense if someone had dragged the body there. With that detail in mind, Little Red Riding Hood concludes that Hans probably died somewhere else, and that someone later moved him to the road to make it look like he'd been hit by a carriage. As she thinks about what to do, she decides to cover Hans' body and says that's the best thing for now. She adds that it would be unfair for Cinderella to miss the ball over something that clearly wasn't her fault. Before getting back in, she also asks Paul to clean any trace of blood off the carriage. With that settled, they continue their way to the palace. When they arrive, the girls enter together. But the moment Cinderella sees her stepmother and Anna, she tenses up. Little Red Riding Hood reassures her, saying Barbara's magic is so good that no one will recognize her. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ballroom, Anna is worried because Margot hasn't shown up anywhere. Her mother, however, insists that nothing serious could have happened and that what matters now is impressing the prince. She even says she's proud that Anna agreed to cut her hair, since Hans told her the prince liked girls with short hair. Anna isn't so sure about that, but her mother insists everything will turn out fine because Hans was the one who styled her hair. And since he was the royal hairdresser, the prince will love it. A little later, the king enters with his son, Prince Gilbert. After thanking everyone for attending, the king pushes Gilbert to choose a lady to dance with, even though he doesn't look thrilled about it. Gilbert walks past several girls including Anna and, to everyone's surprise, he ends up choosing Cinderella. Little Red Riding Hood is delighted for her friend. While they dance, Gilbert tells Cinderella that she's beautiful, and she is charmed by the compliment. But the moment is cut short when a guard rushes into the ballroom with grave news. The king announces that Hans' body was found near the road leading to the palace. He explains that Hans had injuries on both the front and back of his body, suggesting he may have been run over by a carriage on the way to the ball. He then orders that all carriages be inspected for blood. Cinderella panics for a moment, but Little Red Riding Hood is confident that Paul must have cleaned everything just as she asked. Shortly after, Lord Chamberlain, the head of the guards, returns. He says none of the carriages have any trace of blood. However, the first results of the autopsy reveal that the blow to Hans' back happened before the one to his head. That leads the king to suspect that Hans was killed before being placed on the road. Chamberlain continues, they searched Hans' home and found a blood-stained stone, pointing to a murder committed inside his house. They also found strands of hair belonging to several women from the ball. He explains that Hans had the habit of cutting long hair, and that it's possible one of the women became angry enough to get rid of him. The king orders all the ladies to step forward to be examined. 5 women end up being suspects, including Anna, just as Chamberlain declares that one of the 5 must be the murderer. Little Red Riding Hood raises her hand to intervene. The king grants her permission to speak, and she says the theory doesn't add up, that there has to be something more behind all this. She then asks Anna to explain exactly what happened earlier that day. Anna confesses that Hans cut her hair by force, telling her that the prince only liked girls with short hair. Several of the other ladies confirm he did the same to them. The king, confused, asks Gilbert if he really prefers short hair. Gilbert clarifies that he doesn't, that Hans only used that lie because he couldn't stand seeing long hair that he hadn't cut himself. Everyone is stunned. At that moment, Anna adds that she heard something else earlier that day inside the palace. She says that after her mother helped her sneak in to speak with Gilbert before the ball, she overheard the prince arguing heatedly with Hans. The king, surprised by what Anna has just revealed, asks his son if it's true that he argued with Hans. Gilbert confirms that yes, they fought because he discovered the royal hairdresser's bad habits. He also confesses that he wanted to report him, but Hans blackmailed him. He threatened to expose something Gilbert had done in the past. The king asks him to explain, and Gilbert, embarrassed, admits that Hans saw him throw the king's crown into the trash. The king is shocked, but Gilbert tries to clarify that he did it because he was upset. His father never approved of his relationship with a maid named Remy, and when she mysteriously disappeared, Gilbert lost his temper. The king insists he knew nothing about Remy's disappearance, but Gilbert doesn't seem convinced. Before the argument escalates, Little Red Riding Hood steps in and asks if Hans left the palace immediately after their fight. Gilbert says yes, but adds an important detail. Hans asked him to deliver the royal mirror to him later that same day. Gilbert admits he didn't send it because he was ashamed and didn't want Hans touching a royal treasure. But that confession makes the guards and the king see him as a possible suspect. Gilbert insists he didn't do it, but the king orders him to say where he was during the day. Gilbert claims he went for a walk up a nearby hill. The king doesn't believe him and orders his arrest. The guards take him away. Cinderella runs to him before he leaves the ballroom and tells him she believes he's innocent. Gilbert smiles a little at her words, but he is taken away anyway. Cinderella returns to Little Red Riding Hood, ready to act, but Little Red Riding Hood says there's nothing they can do until she spots a thorn on the ground, right along the path Gilbert walked. And suddenly she gets an idea. Just then, a poorly dressed woman enters the palace and declares that she can testify that Gilbert was at the hill exactly at the time Hans died. This makes the king hesitate, but when he orders them to bring Gilbert back, Anna's stepmother begins shouting that an ugly lady can't be trusted, claiming she's surely lying for money. Several people in the ballroom agree, and the king, out of patience, orders the witness removed. That's when Little Red Riding Hood intervenes again. She asks the king if Gilbert's clothes were new and made especially for him, and the king confirms that yes, it was the first time his son wore them. Then Little Red Riding Hood shows the thorn she picked up and explains that the path leading to the hill is full of thorns just like it. The thorn caught in Gilbert's clothing proves he really was at the hill. Thanks to that evidence, Gilbert is released and the guards bring him back. After all this, the king apologizes for keeping everyone in the palace so long and announces that the ball is over. They may all leave. Little Red Riding Hood checks the time. There are only 5 minutes left before the magic disappears. She tells Cinderella, and the two of them run toward the carriage, even as Gilbert tries to stop them. Cinderella trips and loses one of her glass slippers, but she can't stop. She jumps into the carriage and they leave. Gilbert picks up the lost slipper. Elsewhere, the magic finally fades. Everything returns to normal for both Cinderella and Little Red Riding Hood, except for one detail. Cinderella's other glass slipper does not transform back. This immediately catches Little Red Riding Hood's attention. After some time on the road, they reach Cinderella's house. She invites Little Red Riding Hood to stay the night. But later, Little Red Riding Hood hears noises outside and goes to check. She finds Margot, Cinderella's stepsister, frightened and begging for help because she is running from the king's guards. When Little Red Riding Hood asks what she did, Margot confesses that she eliminated Hans. She explains that she received a letter from the hairdresser saying he wanted to fix her hair for the ball. When she arrived at his house, he knocked her out twice, and when she woke up, she saw Hans' corpse and a blood-stained stone in her own hand. She doesn't remember exactly when she struck him, but she is convinced she did it. She then dragged his body out of the house and placed it on the road, right in front of a carriage path, to frame whoever happened to pass by. At that moment, Chamberlain arrived with several soldiers. Little Red Riding Hood didn't hesitate. She pushed Margot toward them and announced that she was the culprit. Margot looked devastated as the guards took her away. A shiny object fell from her dress, and Little Red Riding Hood picked it up to examine it closely. Chamberlain approached to thank her for helping capture the supposed murderer, but she told him that Margot was innocent. She explained that she only wanted to teach her a lesson because she always bullied Cinderella. Then she asked Chamberlain to take her to Hans' house, and he agreed. Once inside the house, Little Red Riding Hood observed the place for a while. Then she took out the shiny object she had found in Margot's dress and discovered that it was the broken heel of a glass slipper. This triggered a vision revealing who had truly killed Hans. She immediately asked Chamberlain for one last favor, and he agreed. The next day, Gilbert arrived at Cinderella's house along with Chamberlain and several guards. Gilbert explained that he had been searching for the owner of the lost glass slipper and wanted Cinderella to try it on. She was delighted, and when she put it on, it fit perfectly. But before they could celebrate, Little Red Riding Hood appeared and accused Cinderella of being Hans' killer. Cinderella was left confused, so Little Red Riding Hood revealed what she had discovered. She explained that Cinderella had met with Hans earlier when he offered to beautify her. But when she arrived at his house, she noticed he had other intentions involving her hair. She became frightened, grabbed a stone, and eliminated him before he could hurt her. Upon realizing what she had done, she decided to frame Margot using a fake letter written as if from Hans. Margot arrived unaware of anything, and Cinderella knocked her out, though not completely unconscious. Then Cinderella used her glass slipper to finish the job, unaware that the heel broke off and got stuck in Margot's dress. Knowing Hans was expecting a delivery from the prince, Cinderella left Margot there ready to be framed, hoping someone would arrive and find her with the body. But the prince never sent anything, so Margot had time to escape and even unknowingly cover up the crime. Little Red Riding Hood added that when she first saw Cinderella that day, she was barefoot and burying something in her dove's grave. She also had several cuts on her legs, but claimed it was because she had gone to pick raspberries, even though she wasn't carrying any. Then Little Red Riding Hood called Barbara and Tekla, who confirmed that earlier that day they had given Cinderella two pairs of glass slippers. With all her lies exposed, Cinderella tried to say something, but at that moment her slippers turned back into normal shoes, confirming the truth. Gilbert ordered Cinderella's rest, and the guards took her away. After this, Little Red Riding Hood asked to speak with the prince. She asked why he believed his father had sent Remy away from the city, and he replied that it was the only explanation that made sense after she disappeared. Then Little Red Riding Hood revealed that Remy had actually been one of Hans's victims and that, while cutting her hair, he left her with a scar that made her feel ugly because of that. Remy had hidden herself, believing no one would allow her to marry Gilbert looking that way. Gilbert listens and says he doesn't care about that at all. Little Red Riding Hood tells him that the poorly dressed woman who defended him in the palace was Remy. Chamberlain brings her in, and when Gilbert sees her, he is overwhelmed with joy and says he has been searching for her. Remy insists she doesn't deserve him, but Little Red Riding Hood convinces her to accept his love. Finally, Remy agrees and Gilbert embraces her. Days later, Gilbert and Remy get married, and Little Red Riding Hood is honored by the royal family for her help. After receiving their gratitude, Little Red Riding Hood smiles happily as she walks away and leaves the country behind. Don't forget to like and subscribe and let me know what you think about this movie.